Hi Emma, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you and looking forward to speaking about all things kind of relationships, money, how we can use, certain tips and methods to make sure that we're not allowing financial things to completely take over our life, whether that's debt, whether that's financial worries with friends or family. So if you'd like to introduce yourself before we start, then that'd be great.
So my name is Emma Kenny. I'm a psychological therapist. I'm probably best known for presenting crime programs or being one of the agony ants on This Morning, or writing for Closer magazine. But behind the scenes, I still work in therapeutic interaction and intervention, and my specialisms involve relationships per se, both with the self and with others.
Yeah. And obviously from your experience, obviously not mentioning any names because I know that's a confidentiality thing, but have you come across a lot of the ways in which finance does come into relationships and the way it does affect relationships?
We live in a capitalistic, materialistic world in the UK. So it's undeniable that if you have issues with money, it's going to impact on pretty much every single area of your life. And whilst people can say that money doesn't impact on your happiness, being wealthy, for example, doesn't really make you happy, I think that's a bit of a myth in a materialistic society, because if you can pay the bills, if you can pay for food, if you've got a roof over your head, if you can look after your family, they're all stressors that without you have all these contributory factors which lead to you feeling super stressed, such as I can't look after my children, or I have got debts that I can't afford to pay. So arguably it's really challenging mentally to actually manage your life without feeling financially secure.
I think what you've just said there as well reminded me of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And
exactly.
Obviously all of the shelter, food, rest, all of the basic things that you need. And obviously some people in really extreme poverty that don't have access to money don't even get some of those things. So shelter, homeless people.
Yeah, 1 in 3 children in the UK are being brought up in poverty. So that's a huge amount of children who are not getting those basic needs met. And there's also this really big myth that people who struggle financially are just terrible with money. It's not true at all. It's just that the basic living standard in the UK is more and more expensive. So we've got families who are both working and they're still going to food banks. It's not because they're poor at managing money, it's that their money doesn't cover the basic bills. So I think more and more we're recognizing that there is a tsunami of people in debt, and also who are struggling with the ramifications of what that debt is like to feel on an individual and a familial level. It's a horrible thing to go through. Anybody who has ever had to make a choice between feeding their children and paying a bill, that is such an unenviable choice. And arguably, your children are your priority. So when it comes down to feeding them, you're going to make that choice, meaning that bill doesn't get paid inevitably, which then starts to stack up. So I think the cycle of debt and poverty and problems is something that, after the year that we've had with the pandemic, is now bigger than ever, and something that we need to be aware of. We shouldn't be ashamed of because we're struggling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that we've been talking about a lot in the office recently. Obviously, COVID brought in a lot of government support schemes. So the furlough scheme, which is going to start being phased out, and also the £20 uptake in universal credit, which a lot of people rely on. It's been announced that it's going to be phased out. So those things, even though obviously we're hopefully getting out of the pandemic now and, getting back to some sort of normality, whatever that is, these people that have suffered exponentially at the hands of the pandemic are going to have that support taken away from them. And, we're not really sure if anything's going to be put in place there to replace it.
There's 3 million people haven't had 1 pence of support in the UK. 3 million people. They were limited companies, people like myself who were paid by dividends. You just didn't get any support. So you've been given loans. So bounce back loans, if you're a bigger company, Siebel's loans. That sounds great when you're thinking, well, I've got to survive. But then when that's whittled away and you just can't continue, you're going to be thrown into debt because of the fact that you might have to go through an insolvency process, and then you've got your personal life, because even though your business might be crumbling on that level, you might have racked up all this debt just surviving and looking after your family on another level personally. So it's not just those people that you were talking about, and also the epidemic in the UK of poverty that we know we have. In fact, in the first lockdown, it was ludicrous, because the first lockdown, people who were poor to begin with were poorer, and people who were wealthy to begin with, on the whole, were wealthier. So the gap between poverty and luxury and elitism, for example, is now wider than ever, and poverty is deeper than ever. And I think that there are so many myths about why people are poor, and they're usually coming from a really incorrect place. Like, for example, people who use food banks tend to be working. It's not people who are living on benefits. There is this idea that people will just be living on benefits, and that's why they're not able to manage the money. One, that's a myth, because lots of people on benefits manage the money brilliantly. Secondly, like I said, when we look at who's going to use food banks, they tend to be people with at least one person working in the family. So they're trying their best to make ends meet. It just, the meeting is getting further and further from the reality of how that can connect.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, with inflation rates consistently rising as well, I think obviously there's only a certain amount that pay can increase with rising inflation rates. And I know if you just look back, you know, even like 30 years, if you look at house prices and you look at them now, it's actually unbelievable. Like, it's looking at those numbers is overwhelming.
I mean, I think as well, that's another big problem that we've got, because what we now see is changes in legislation, which means that banks are allowed to keep the houses they repossess. Mm-hmm. So we have two of the biggest mortgage brokers who can now basically, when the double depression hits, which is going to happen, whether we want to talk about that or not, whether it's difficult to acknowledge, we are going to hit a double depression. That is what the economists say. That means that we're probably going to lose 25% of house prices, which means inevitably people will have bought high and then will have very little equity, which puts them into a problem debt-wise. Arguably, on top of that, you've got banks that can come in and now repossess your house and rent them out, or buy a house at a higher level price, which means it makes it more difficult for you to achieve that. So there are this whole heap of issues that are being stored up and progressed by the way that our, shall we say, capitalist society works. And that's impacting on everyday people, because everybody in the UK, when they're born, particularly if you think about people at 30, 35 now, you're brought up with this very clear structure. It doesn't make sense when you really go into detail, but most of us, we grow up thinking, at some point, I'll buy a house. That's one of the big foundations of success, right? And even though really, when you think about it, that isn't a mark of success. It's obviously a mark of responsibility, but you're brought up with it. So a lot of us are trying to get on that ladder, that ladder, that ladder. It's the same with cars. It's the same with getting the credit cards. It's getting on the ladder. Where am I going? We don't really know, but we're doing it because everybody else seems to be doing it around us. We're not really thinking about our ultimate happiness. We're not really thinking about whether we can afford it. We want to make sure that our competition level stays on track with our peers. And because we're often not taught about money, we're not taught about, for example, what a credit card will actually eventually do. You know, yeah, it can be really positive. It can get you a brilliant credit score if you keep up with repayments. It means that, you know, it'll be easier for you to get loans in the future. We can see the positives. What you also fail to see at times is that when you get those credit cards and they're suddenly saying you've got an £8,000 opportunity, we all have terrible days. We all have days where our children really want something and we just really want to give it them. And when people judge people who do that, that's a failure to have compassion, because if you can afford to do it, you're in a luxurious position where likely you've had the benefits of a decent family, you've been brought up in a nice place or an ordinary place that has at least given you the prerequisites of what makes you safe. And you've gone on to achieve a situation and income where you can enjoy life. Yeah. That doesn't make your journey better than somebody who has had a really challenging experience, been born in the wrong postcode to the wrong parents, potentially been brought up in a situation where they've really struggled to achieve their education, have got a job, doing a really hard job, working hard for that, but not actually getting the wages that reflects what you would get in other circumstances. And then children want things and you want to provide a nice life and you want to make sure that you look a certain way because our society is very pressured. And then suddenly you've got access to things like credit cards, and it doesn't make you a terrible person. It just makes you a human being with these sets of needs. And it's really difficult because people judge people harshly who get themselves into debt. But it's not simple. It's not a simple cycle. And once you get into debt, you feel like you're on the cycle constantly of how do I offset this debt? Where do I end up with that? That's the problem. Until you confront that, until you can kind of say, I don't need to feel shame. This is okay. Lots of people end up in this cycle. I need to get off the cycle. That's when you kind of get empowerment. But until then, it's a really, really difficult psychological experience.
Yeah, and I think it's all about opening up the conversations around money as well, and not just particularly debt, but as kind of a preventative thing. To be able to talk about money openly means that people have the opportunity to ask the questions that are on their mind rather than just going straight for that credit card lender, or maybe speak to other people who are in similar positions or have been in similar positions. Because a lot of the comments we get, you know, you've just touched upon kind of people saying on like Facebook and over social media, kind of like, just don't spend what you can't afford. But exactly what you've just said, you know, everyone's human, everyone wants to be able to keep up with their peers, and you know, that might not be the desired way we want to live, but that is the way that we live. And you know, you always do want the best for yourselves and your family and the people around you. So it totally makes sense. And going on to opening up the conversation around finance, we've got some anonymous questions today. So they're kind of like dilemmas. Some of them are to do with debt, some are just to do with money in general.
I like that they're called dilemmas because I am Emma, and you are kind of dialing me right now. So it's a dilemma with Emma.
Emma's dilemmas, like it. So the first one, bear with me, I am reading off a script here. So I'm a saver and my partner isn't. Obviously, at the beginning of our relationship, we didn't divulge huge amounts about our financial circumstances, but since spending more time together, I've realised that they don't save any money, as they've openly admitted to this. They say that they don't see the value in saving for the sake of it. However, I save as much as I can in the case of an emergency, and I think they should be doing this too. They aren't close to their family, so if they ever got into trouble financially, I would likely be the one that would have to help them out, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing that. Do you have any advice on how I can approach this with them?
I think the most important situation there is to explore the fact that relationships are about give and take, they're about collaboration. So both of you are each extreme cases. So one is a super saver, probably a scrupulous scheduler, keeps everything on track, likes the budget, loves looking at the bank balance going, nailing this, got life sorted. On the other side, you've got somebody who's like, I'm going to live for today. And you know what? Both of those extremes are perfectly acceptable when you're single, because you can just live for today because you don't have tomorrow. And as long as you're not living beyond your means, then why not? Arguably as well, you can be somebody who thinks, well, I do think about tomorrow. I want to buy a house. I want to have a nice car. Saving makes me feel safe. So on an independent level, they're okay mindsets to have. But when you're in a relationship, it's all about relating to the other person. So there has to be a collaboration and middle ground. So what I would say is that particular non-saver needs to be brought into the zone of saving something. Now, the reason for that is psychologically, you might not think that you like saving. You might not think you do, but if you can get them to just walk that bridge a little bit. So imagine that you're both on the other end of the bridge. The idea is to get to the middle. And the middle would be that you're going to accept that it's good to enjoy life more fully by sometimes not feeling the need to save as judiciously, because then you can have some spontaneity in your relationship, which makes a relationship great. And this person needs to start recognizing that whilst they don't want to save necessarily the same amount as you, maybe for the first month, they could start looking at saving £30. It's no massive amount, but you know, over 12 months, that's 360 quid. So essentially we're in a situation where there's a little bit of a buffer. That person also gets the gratification of going, I've actually managed to do this. And there are loads of budgeting apps that you can get that can make it more fun. And you can even have competitions against each other to see like who's doing what and what they're saving for. And the most important part of that is you're opening the conversation up and you're saying, look, neither of us are right, neither of us are wrong, but to work together more fully and to feel safe in the relationship that it's on an equal footing, I want us to think about a shared space. You could also look at both agreeing that you have your own account that you share, so a joint one, where you each put a certain amount of money in each month. And then what they save there is theirs. What they save there, if they do, is theirs. And the one that's shared is the one that's going to be a buffer for emergencies. But having that conversation is really important. When you get into a relationship, first of all you care about is the fun. And then when it gets real, often we see those kind of differences and it's dealing with them as they crop up. And it sounds like it's a perfect scenario because you've not got somebody that overspends. You've got somebody who can be manipulated into doing a little bit more of the saving. And you've also on the other side got somebody who probably needs to let loose a little bit more often. Maybe book that weekend away somewhere lovely together.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. From personal experience, like I've had times when I felt like, you know, should I be saving this much in comparison to the person that I'm seeing or the person that I'm with? Should I be being a bit more frivolous with my money? And I think it's something that, yeah, when you're on your own and you're independent, it totally down to you. You know, you're only responsible for yourself. But I think what you were saying earlier, people are brought up in different environments. So people grow up with different attitudes towards money, whatever they see, obviously, from their influencers, from their parents, their older siblings, their, you know, the people around them, the older people. They're going to take that on and kind of think that's the way to do things. So it's always going to be a total pick and mix of people when you meet people from all over. So yeah, no, I agree completely. So the next one is to do with mental health and debt. And it is, my sister has suffered with her mental health for a long time, and often during depressive episodes, she spends impulsively to make herself feel better. However, afterwards, she always feels guilty and has to reluctantly borrow money from myself, or even worse, our much less understanding parents. How can I help her to develop healthy coping mechanisms for when she's struggling? It's worth noting that a lot of her mental health problems have been triggered by debt and earning a lower wage than her friends before. So money is something that's really difficult to discuss with her.
Yeah, and that kind of example is what we were talking about earlier on, which is when people feel that they have to be in competition with the rest of the world. So there's a few things. So first of all, I would always say when it's a mental health issue that has a particular time where the symptoms are exacerbated and they use something like spending to cope, it's good to look at what kind of depression you have. So for example, if you haven't had a proper assessment by a psychiatrist, because it could be something like mania and to do with the bipolar spectrum, it might be helpful to go and get a proper assessment to check, because sometimes it can come down to a range of medication will answer that question and settle that desire to impulsively go out and spend to make yourself feel better. So that would be one thing I'd say, just on a more generic level for anybody who has mental health issues, check that you know that the depression that you're dealing with is what's being treated. Secondly, it's going to be hard to have the conversation, but the conversation needs to be had. And even though that's a struggle, you are going to help your sister deal with her finances better. So approach it with compassion, which is, I love you, I have complete empathy for you, I totally appreciate why you use spending as a coping mechanism, but the consequences are far riskier for you than the benefits of doing what I want to do with you, which is to work together to help you budget and save. And you can do that in a range of ways. Arguably, you can make sure that the credit cards are all cut up, simple as that. Make sure that there is no opportunity to spend in that way. Secondly, if you really want to help take control, make sure that you take a certain amount of the money that she gets in, if she can have that conversation with her, so that you can save it for her. And that means that when she gets to the situations where she needs a little bit of a buffer, she can go out and have a little bit of fun without overspending. Same as getting her to think about where she spends. I've worked with shoppers who were really overspenders, and we brought them down to budget basics, which is going to a charity shop. They still get the buzz of getting new products, but they've spent £10 instead of £1,000. So helping people manage their behaviours in ways where they alter their tastes. And also the big one is, comparison is the root of unhappiness. It really is. So if you're depressed and you're looking at your friend on Insta or Facebook and everything looks shiny and perfect, it's a myth. It's not real. Like the minute that those selfies have been taken, life goes back to normal. If there's anything that I find more hilarious, it's the idea of just standing there and you watch people trying to get the perfect selfie whilst completely missing out on the event that they're at. That's the myth of social media. So when it comes down to those comparison bases, it's taking a step back, it's breathing through it and being like, I don't need to compete and compare with anybody else. I'm a complete unique individual. There's only one of me. Why am I trying to measure up to somebody else's measuring stick? You know, you're your own. So bring it back to self-esteem. What can you do to improve her self-worth? What kind of activities and passions has she got that she can really put purpose into? And how can you help her achieve that by directing her down that line? Because I think those kind of things shape the way that a person feels, but also reignites that sense that you're a complete individual with a complete set of circumstances and tastes that if you put yourself into, you'll be able to thrive. Often we direct our negativity into places that make it more negative. We've got to try to direct it into more positive things. So I'm a saver, always been a saver. Why? Because when I was a very young person, I remember back in the old days, this is so old now, you could order out of a catalogue and you didn't have to have the money up front, and it would be like 35% interest. And I remember doing it and getting a jacket, and it like taking me about 2.5 years to pay it off. And at that point, what is this about? And I had a partner very young when I was young, 18, and we lived together. We bought a house at 18. And he was a real problem spender when he was unhappy. So I got loaded with his debt. And I remember thinking, this is not a good place for anyone to live. Debt is a terrible place to live unless you resolve it. and resolving it from there on. It's always made me go, right, okay, live within my means, but also make sure that if I get a better opportunity, if money comes in, I can put it somewhere safe. Because in the past year, even I've had to do that because work's just disappeared because of the climate. And if you don't kind of look at your mental health in conjunction with your financial health, often you'll find yourself in an unenviable position. And I think that we want to avoid that per se when it comes down to managing money.
Yeah, and in that problem that I've just kind of read out to you as well, again, agree with everything you've said, but it is about, I think, communicating that you are doing this to help the other person.
Absolutely.
And you know, no one wants to see, you know, someone that they love going through not only, you know, mental health problems, but also financial problems on top of that just exacerbate the situation.
And people are judging themselves already. So they feel shame, they feel guilt, they know that their behavior is not good. It's not that they need any of that pointing out, because I think that's one of the things, you know, the reason that people are defensive when they're struggling with money problems and they're like, go away, I don't want to talk about it. That's actually just defending of the shame and guilt that they feel. So once you go, look, I know you feel guilty, I know you feel ashamed, and it's okay, they're totally acceptable feelings, but they're not going to be helpful. Like, we need strategy, we need problem solving, we need to alter the way the loop runs. It's that saying, if all you ever do is what you've always done, then all you're going to get is what you've always got. So you have to break that loop. And that in itself, just sitting down and going, let's get everything out. Let's look at the credit cards. Let's look at what you're escalating debt-wise. Let's just do it, deal with it. There are so many people who have money problems who the bill comes and put it in the bin. And it's almost like that, I just don't want to see it, it won't be here. It's like, no, the first experience of solutions comes down to strategy, and having a buddy do that with you, sister in particular, somebody who loves you, that is such a God-saving experience. It really is. You are being given an opportunity to really refine your bad habits, and also figuring out a way forward where you know that you're going to be able to be solution focused. Really important.
Yeah, and obviously, like you said, this person already feels guilty. This person already feels that shame. They really don't need to be told that. But then also on the other side of things, there are sometimes people that have these behaviours that don't necessarily feel that and might have to be spoken to a little bit more about it, which takes on to our next problem. So this one is, my partner and I have been saving money in both of our son's savings accounts since they were born for them to receive when they're 18 and spend however they wish. However, it's become apparent over the past few years that our oldest is extremely irresponsible with money. He has a part-time job and saves none of his earnings, still always asking to borrow money as he finds himself without just a few days after payday. He knows we have this savings account for him, but not how much is in it, around £20,000. But would it be fair for us to now hold this until he's a little older and more responsible with money? And how do we begin to help him get to a point where he is a bit more responsible?
So first of all, absolutely make sure that you don't give him the £20,000 at this point in time, without a doubt. You have saved that money. It is not his direct, you know, it's not allowed, so to speak, for you to not go. It's not, so I'll say that again. What I think that is going on there, it's that like entitlement, or you saved it for me, so I want it, right? It's like, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. I've saved it for you so that you absolutely know what to do with this money when it's ready for you. That's a down payment on a house, for example, or it's an investment. You know, look, £20,000 going into a pension plan when you're like 19, 20 years of age, that's going to see you down the line very, very well. So you need to be at a point where you can manage your finances. Now, as a parent, one, you're going to deal with the fact that that child is going to be annoyed because they probably spent it in the head. They've gone to Ibiza and they've bought themselves a brand new car. And that's the way it's going to go. And they've gone out with mates and had some blinding weekends. That's where that child is. Now, on a good point, he works part-time. Okay, he's not good at managing his money, but let's give him some positive strokes for actually getting up off his bottom, going and getting a job, working at 18. Yes, he has fun with it because he's not in a position where he needs to be that responsible. Secondly, you could do this as well. You could say to yourself, okay, he keeps asking from the bank of mum and dad. So he needs to understand the responsibilities of not managing money effectively. So we're going to take £2,000 out of that. We're going to leave £18,000 there. And then every time he asks that tenner or that 20 quid, we're going to do a chart so that he can start to see how his spending is accumulating this kind of level of change. Because what you want to do is you want to help a young person see that that is their money and that is their dwindling experience of cash. He doesn't know that you save 20 grand. That's a lot of money for an 18-year-old, you know, and they're not in a position, right, mentally. They're going to just go and blow it, and it's fine, because that's what kids do. But you get some of that cash and say, we're going to manage this for you. And every time it's a 10 or a 20 pounds that you take it, I'm knocking it down. I think that's a real physical experience of being an adult in a responsible scenario where you're going, hang on a minute, that beer, that's just cost me, I don't know how much beer costs now, but let's say £3, unless you're at Wetherspoons, it's probably cheaper there, it's a great place. But you know, that kind of experience will show them, it will give them that understanding. So yeah, but don't feel guilty. My God, don't feel guilty. You saved your kid £20,000. I mean, you've just made me feel like a terrible parent in that moment. Don't let my son watch this. Either of my sons watch this.
I think it's important as well, like you said, obviously help them to manage it, and also help them to realize that, you know, there is such thing as balance. Like they don't, you're not telling them, you know what, yeah, put all of this on a down payment on a house, like we want you to make sure you're super sensible. It's like, you know, use some of it to maybe go on a holiday with your friends, but you know, be responsible about it. Like don't, I think a lot of people spend money and they don't even remember what they spent it on. I know that, you know, I still do it now. Like I'll look at my bank account and I'll think, wow, you know, I've bought lunch out every day this week. Did I really get satisfaction from that? Can I take, like, can I take my lunch to work this like next week? Obviously that's a lot different from £20,000 lump sum, but everything adds up and everything kind of indicates a different way of spending and will really serve me in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good mentality to always ask yourself those questions. We've grown up, particularly in the past 20 years. So let's look at Generation Y and, you know, millennials in particular. These are individuals who have been brought up in a time of immediacy. Like, it's there, take it, have it. It's an impatient way of seeing the world. It's not that they are choosing that path, it's that they've been sold it. You can have it now, take it now. It's why people end up in so many difficult situations. And so because of that, the idea of being patient and saving and working towards things can feel a little bit like it doesn't fit with the instantaneous stuff that we see on Insta and Facebook. Even swipe up selling has become a phenomenon where you don't even have to do anything apart from swipe up and you've pretty much bought something without even going through the mental process of acknowledging what that's like. There is a very clear distilled process when you have to go to the shops and draw money out and spend your cash and carry it around. That's very different to plastic and swipe up kind of spending. So we know that our habits have been honed in to make us part with our money more quickly. The more that you can put barriers in between those behaviors, so the cause, which is I like that top, and the effect, I'm going to buy it. If I can get some barriers and it makes it a bit more difficult, and there's other shops to choose from, and maybe I'm going to go have a drink and just sit down and think about, I'm going to have all these barriers put in my way. So by the time I come to buy that top, I'm going to go, I don't know whether I want it anymore. If I do the swipe up or the credit, it's done straight away, you know, deliver it within 24 hours. So the mindset of younger people has become very much about immediacy. And the problem with that is immediacy is about gratification, and spending is something that gives us gratification. So anything that can help you get a more, shall we say, grown experience of what money and finance really is at the earlier age possible, the better. I think parents should be doing that with kids from day one. You know, I played with my children when they were 3 and 4 doing shop, and when they were playing shop, you know, we were doing it on cards and everything, because I wanted them to understand that that actually cost this. So, you know, when they go and ask for that packet of sweets, that was 50p, which as a single mum was actually really hard. So they needed to know what that meant. And so I taught them from a very early age what that meant. And both of them are very scrupulous savers. It's as simple as that.
Oh, that's really good. I remember as well at school a lot, they, you know, like in maths or in kind of, I think it was like kind of citizenship lessons, you were kind of given tasks like you've got this much money, you need to do this, this and this, and kind of it seems really simple now, but looking back at it, and it seemed really simple then, it seemed kind of like, you know, why am I doing this? But you do look back at it and it's kind of like, no, that's exactly what they were trying to do, like managing money, budgeting, making sure that you're in a position to be able to afford the things that you need over the things that you want.
Yeah, and enjoy life without feeling that the excesses that you experience are causing you damage. You know, it is absolutely fine if you're lucky enough to be a landed gentry or you've won the lottery, you can go and spend as you desire, and clearly you have a reason for that. But for most of us, limits are everything, and knowing your limits on every level in life, as you said, using the word balance, it's key. If you don't have that, for example, you overspend because it makes you feel good, and then you hide from yourself because of the fact that you don't want to deal with it. It's just going to eventually be like a tsunami of real depression and sadness and, you know, unhappiness and shame. And we want to avoid that. And the sooner that we can avoid that, the better. You know, money is something that we talk about managing because it needs managing effectively, both because you don't know what crises are going to occur. You know, things like last year, we didn't know that was going to happen. How many people were actually prepared for that financially? Some people have thrived. If you've thrived, then what are you doing with that thriving? Because if you're blowing it, you know, arguably, next time something goes wrong, you could have had these opportunities to make your life feel so much more secure. And if you struggled, then what are you going to take lessons wise from the struggle? So for me, it's absolutely a reinforcement that my saving over the years was the diligent thing to do, because I suddenly found myself in a situation with no government support. That reinforce, so whatever your struggle, let that reinforce coping strategies and mechanisms that are going to make the future easier. So you can always learn, even from, shall we say, challenging situations like getting yourself into debt. You can learn from that experience, and you can change the way that you're going to behave so you never encounter it again.
Yeah, no, completely. And we've got one final dilemma. This one is a career-based one, and it's very, very much related to money and happiness. So it's, I earn a decent salary at my job, enough to live comfortably, and I enjoy it. However, there's no room for development and no opportunities for a pay increase anytime soon. I know that I do want to develop more and eventually earn more. Do I look elsewhere to see if I can move up the career ladder and work towards a higher salary, but risk being unhappy, or do I stay where I am?
It's a balanced one, because that's always about thinking to yourself, can I read the future? You can't. What you know is you're happy in your job and you're in a stable situation, and obviously you've got enough money to live. That's a great position to be in. And you also additionalize that by saying, I enjoy it. So as far as life goes, that's the perfect scenario to be in. However, you cannot help ambition. There is one of those things that we're born with, where we have this drive. And if you have that drive, you're never going to feel satisfied in 10 years at the same desk doing the same job. You're going to be looking at people who've gone further than you and thinking that could have been me. Arguably as well, before you jump ship, I would definitely speak to your employers, because what staff will often believe is there is a ceiling, and they'll think that there aren't these jobs and opportunities because they don't see them. But when you have a really good member of staff who excels at their job, and then that member of staff says, I want to develop career-wise, then I'm going to leave you unless you give me some kind of development. These are the points where companies develop jobs for people. They literally will be like, I would rather pay this person £5,000 more a year and give them the title that they've decided that they want, because that makes me feel that I get to keep the great member of staff. They get to keep that sense of developing. Most importantly, it means you're both at an impasse where you get what you want. And then 5 years down the line, you can then happily move on to an even higher position elsewhere. So when you think there's a glass ceiling, always check, because often there are cracks in them. And if you just push it enough, you'll get what you want. When it comes down to if that's not possible, it's definitely, it's like a small family company, for example, and there isn't a place to go, I'd say it's important to look for another job. Not because you don't love what you do, but because you know that you love that part of your character that wants to reach for the stars. If you're not happy, you can get another job. That's the thing. You never have to worry about the long term, because if you don't like it, change it. So yes, I would definitely look at things that inspire you, excite you, and challenge you.
Yeah.
Having said all of that, if you really are perfectly happy and happiness is more important to you than the ambition, and you're actually pretty cool with the situation that you're in, don't feel any shame for staying, because to be in a job where you're happy is something that very few of us get the opportunity to do. A lot of us are working to pay the bills and not necessarily loving it. So have a think about that balance, definitely.
Yeah.
And find a rich partner. That would be the other thing. There you go.
Yeah.
Stay in that job, find a rich partner.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that everyone's been in that situation before, where they've, you know, been in a job that they don't like, or been doing something that they don't like, and they feel don't know, feel undervalued, or maybe feel like they could just branch off a little bit more. But I think as well, going back to the conversations around money, it's one of the biggest things around money. We are so encouraged not to talk about money in the workplace, so encouraged not to talk about like salaries, about what we earn. And I think it has become a thing where individuals feel like they can't go to a senior member of staff or a colleague and kind of say to them like, oh, look, I'm thinking of maybe asking if they do have a role for me that I can develop into and maybe earn a little bit more, because they're scared of what will happen.
I mean, the thing about being an employer is if an employee who's good at the job comes and says, I want more responsibility, and with that, I want some more pay, is that possible? You're not going to think, well, that's cheeky. You're going to think, well, that's actually what makes a good worker, somebody who's go-getting, believes in themselves, has ambition, and thinks that they're worth it. That's the key, And it used to be illegal for people to actually ask people what their wages were. I mean, we've now made it transparent. We used to be able to get sacked for doing that. So in British culture, we actually had an embedded belief system that to even ask a colleague what their pay was would cause you distress. So now we've got more transparency, particularly where equality is concerned. Never think that there isn't a deal to be done. There's always a deal to be done. You just have to be the one creating the opportunity. And I think that as an employer myself, I'm one of those people where if a member of staff would come up to me and said, I'm going to leave and it's going to cost me £5 a year, I'm probably going to bow into that because of the fact that I don't want to lose great staff. Great staff are really hard to get. I mean, they really are. They're really difficult. So if you've got somebody who's great, you want to keep them. And even if you realize at that point you're going to lose them, it's kind of good to have those conversations anyway, because you want to know and be prepared as an employer that you're going to lose one of your key members of staff. So it works on both levels.
I love that. When you said creating opportunities for yourself, be the one to create it. Really, really like that kind of outlook on it. Yeah, really positive.
It's the same when people get made unemployed. I'm like, well, you could be unemployed, or you could start your own company the same day and call yourself a director. Everything's about mindset. Everything's about the paradigm that you choose to operate within. You don't have to be a millionaire to own a business. It's very, very simple to change the way that you view work and change the way you view your responsibilities personally to the self. I always think that it's important that we think about that, because when we think we're trapped, when we think we're stuck, when we think we're limited, very often they're just mindsets that we've created for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think as well that obviously when you are creating those opportunities for yourself, obviously a lot of people during the pandemic who were made redundant. I was made redundant from my role last year, and it is so easy, I know from personal experience, to fall into kind of like you feel devalued, you feel worthless, and you do kind of feel very rejected. But so many people took from that, like, I'm going to start my own business, even if it's tiny little things that bring them joy. It could be like making cakes, and they start off sending it out to their friends, but then they end up like selling it and, delivering it nationwide. I think it's about whatever makes you happy and whatever like fuels you.
And also, the other thing is that, when you talk about things like redundancy, that's another thing that makes people feel shame, because it's always the like, why me? And of course, like, business is business. If they're not making enough money, if they are struggling because of the pandemic, then it wasn't personal. But it feels really personal. It's a grief process. It means that those lies you're told when you're a kid that, you can find security. Security is a myth. It can get taken away with you in a minute, as you've experienced. But acknowledging that that's actually going to make you braver, because now you know that you can get another job, and then you think, well, if I can get this job, if I'm not happy, I'll go and get another job. So you can use it to your advantage. And I think that people often need to have that psychology and that systemic experience of going, I actually deserve to be happy. I deserve to be thriving. I deserve to earn a good wage. And until I get that, I'm just going to be very clear about climbing whichever ladder I want to climb to get what I need. And your evidence that you can take a bad experience and make it positive.
And I think looking at things logically like that is really difficult. So like I said, it's all about mindset, because, someone telling you like, look, we're really sorry, we're gonna have to let you go. Looking at that in a logical way in that moment, I can imagine for me, I didn't and I don't think many people do, because you don't think, oh, they're a business, it's fine, they're just, not earning that much money. You think, oh my God, like why me? Why not the girl that sits next to me? Or why not a member of another team? But I think it's like you said, it's a learning experience. And I think they're overall good experiences to have, really, like as you grow older.
Yeah, you use the rejections and the abandonments and the failures to give you the key lessons and insights. Sometimes it's that you realize, oh, I need to change that or up my game here. Sometimes it's that I need to just accept that it's okay to let go of things even when you wanted them to stay because it wasn't meant for you. And the most important thing is to take those negatives and to try to use them. It doesn't mean that you like the going through it, and it doesn't mean that you wish you had gone through it. It's just that when you use them purposefully, when you have gone through it, it will give them some reason and leverage for educating you and giving you a life that hopefully in the long term benefits from the experience. And loss is always horrible. Redundancy is awful because you can't pay your rent, but you can't pay your mortgage. And so it's real, it's impactful. But it's also remembering that human beings are massively creative. And sometimes in our really most chaotic of moments, there's the most growth. So just to stand true and think to yourself, even though it's awful now, this is not a state of permanence. This is a temporary state. And until I get whatever I need, there are lots of options that I can do to ensure that I can get some finances in. So always remember that it's a temporary state, it's an impermanent situation. And I think that very often we see things like the loss of a job as quite a permanent situation. It's like, oh my God, I'll never find a job again. It's like, no, that's always the wrong mindset. It's always like, this is just now. This isn't going to be forever. It's going to be okay in the end. You know, my favorite saying is, everything will be okay in the end. And if it isn't okay, then it isn't the end. And I stand by that because I think you can always make it okay in the end.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect note for us to end on, actually. I think that's something that people will walk away with feeling very positive and happy. And yeah, thank you again so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, thanks for answering our dollar dilemmas, Emma's dilemmas.
Yeah, Emma's dilemmas.
Great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, my love. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.